The vast steppes of Central Asia stretched endlessly beneath the pale sky, where the wind carried whispers of ancient migrations and the thunder of countless hooves. Here, among the rolling grasslands that connected the edges of China to the borders of Europe, a people emerged who would forever alter the course of Western civilization. The Huns, whose origins remain shrouded in scholarly debate, are believed to have descended from the Xiongnu confederation that had dominated the steppes of East Asia and troubled China's Han Dynasty for centuries. The Xiongnu confederation had been founded around 209 BC by a leader named Xiongnu, who united many Turkic, Mongol, Tungusic, and Tatar tribes under his rule. These were pastoral nomadic people who wandered in search of grazing lands for their herds of horses, cattle, and sheep, with no walled cities and no agriculture, but whose men were formidable warriors. At its height under Modu, the Xiongnu Empire extended from Korea in the east to the Aral Sea in the west, from Lake Baikal in the north to Tibet and the Karakoram Mountains in the south. For over 3 centuries, from 200 BC to 188 AD, the Chinese civilization clashed repeatedly with these inner Asian nomadic tribes in the Han-Xiongnu Wars. The Chinese, with their agricultural settlements and walled cities, found themselves in constant conflict with the mobile warriors of the steppes. The Xiongnu lands were infertile, so they often attacked China for resources, prompting the first emperor of China to build defensive walls that would eventually contribute to the Great Wall. In 51 BC, the Xiongnu Empire split into 2 groups, an eastern horde that submitted to the Chinese, and a western horde that was driven into Central Asia. This western migration would prove to be one of history's most consequential population movements, setting in motion a chain of events that would reach across the Eurasian continent to shake the very foundations of the Roman Empire. The Western Xiongnu, driven from their ancestral lands by Chinese pressure and internal divisions, began a long journey that would transform them from a regional power into a force that would reshape European history. Over the course of several generations, these nomadic warriors adapted to new territories, encountered different peoples, and evolved their military tactics. By the time they emerged on the borders of Europe, they had become something new yet retained the essential characteristics that had made their ancestors masters of the Asian steppes. The Huns first appeared on the European historical stage around 376 CE, though some sources suggest they arrived around 370 CE. Their sudden emergence created immediate chaos along the frontiers of the Roman world. Archaeological and historical evidence suggests they had migrated westward from the steppes of Central Asia, bringing them into contact with the Alans and various Gothic peoples residing north of the Black Sea. The impact of the Huns' arrival cannot be overstated. Their pressure on the Goths, particularly the Thervingi, created significant demographic changes across Europe. The Gothic tribes, who had established themselves north of the Danube River and had grown comfortable in their territories, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The earliest systematic description of the Huns comes from the historian Ammianus Marcellinus, writing around 395 CE. His account, though colored by Roman prejudices, provides valuable insights into Hun society and military practices. He described them as a people born for war, incredibly hardy, and capable of living entirely on horseback. Their mobility was unprecedented in European warfare, allowing them to appear suddenly, strike with devastating effect, and disappear before their enemies could organize an effective response. The Huns' military technology was sophisticated despite their nomadic lifestyle. They were master archers, using powerful composite bows that could penetrate Roman armor at considerable distances. Their horses were small but incredibly hardy, capable of traveling vast distances on minimal fodder. Most importantly, the Huns had perfected the art of mounted warfare, fighting as cavalry units that could coordinate complex maneuvers while maintaining the speed and flexibility that made them nearly invincible in open terrain. The social structure of Hun society was built around warfare and mobility. Leadership was earned through military prowess and the ability to distribute wealth gained through conquest. The Huns practiced a form of confederation government, where multiple tribal groups maintained their identity while acknowledging the authority of a supreme leader. This system allowed them to incorporate conquered peoples and defeated enemies into their military machine, constantly growing their strength through successful campaigns. As the Huns established themselves in the region north of the Black Sea, they began to exert pressure on the established populations. The Alans, skilled horsemen themselves, were among the first to feel Hun pressure. Some Alan groups were conquered and incorporated into Hun armies, while others fled westward, seeking safety beyond the reach of Hun raiders. The Ostrogoths and Visigoths, who had dominated the region for generations, found their established order completely disrupted by Hun expansion. The Hun impact on Gothic society was immediate and devastating. The Visigothic king Athanaric attempted to organize resistance, but traditional Gothic military tactics proved inadequate against Hun mobility and archery. The Goths were accustomed to fighting as heavy infantry, using shields and spears in close formation. Against Hun horse archers, who could strike from a distance and retreat before the Goths could close for battle, these tactics were useless. The collapse of Gothic resistance created a massive refugee crisis. Hundreds of thousands of Goths, along with other tribal peoples, sought permission to cross the Danube River into Roman territory. The Romans, already struggling with internal political problems and economic difficulties, found themselves facing a humanitarian disaster of unprecedented proportions. The decision to allow Gothic refugees into the empire would prove to be one of the most consequential policy choices in Roman history. The Battle of Adrianople in 378 CE, though fought between Romans and Goths, was made possible by Hun pressure. The Goths who destroyed Emperor Valens and his army were refugees driven from their homes by Hun expansion. The defeat shocked the Roman world and demonstrated that the empire's military superiority was no longer guaranteed. The Huns, though not directly involved in the battle, had fundamentally altered the balance of power in Europe simply through their presence. During the late 4th and early 5th centuries, the Huns consolidated their control over the vast territories stretching from the Caucasus Mountains to the Carpathian Basin. They established their primary settlements in the Hungarian plain, a region that provided excellent grazing for their horses while serving as a strategic base for operations in all directions. From here, they could threaten the Eastern Roman Empire across the Danube, launch raids into the wealthy territories of Gaul and Italy, or move north to pressure Germanic tribes in modern-day Germany and Poland. The Hun Confederation during this period was a complex political entity that included not only ethnic Huns but also Alans, Goths, Sarmatians, and various other tribal groups. This diversity was a source of strength, as it provided the Huns with different military specialties and cultural knowledge. Germanic warriors brought expertise in siege warfare and heavy cavalry, while Alan horsemen contributed their own traditions of mounted archery. The result was a military machine more versatile and powerful than any purely nomadic confederation could have achieved. The Huns' relationship with the Roman Empire during this period was complex and constantly evolving. They served alternately as allies, enemies, and mercenaries, depending on which arrangement offered the greatest advantage. Roman emperors found Hun warriors useful for campaigns against other barbarian tribes, while Hun leaders appreciated Roman gold and luxury goods. However, this cooperation was always temporary, as the fundamental differences between Roman civilization and Hun culture made lasting peace impossible. The rise of Rugila as Hun leader in the early 5th century marked a new phase in Hun development. Rugila was the first Hun ruler to establish systematic diplomatic relations with the Roman Empire, negotiating treaties that recognized Hun territorial claims while providing regular tribute payments. These agreements gave the Hun Confederation a degree of international legitimacy while ensuring a steady flow of Roman wealth into Hun territories. Under Rugila's leadership, the Huns began to adopt certain aspects of sedentary civilization while maintaining their essential nomadic character. They established permanent settlements that served as administrative centers and storage facilities for tribute and plunder. However, the majority of the population remained mobile, following their herds and maintaining the military readiness that was the foundation of Hun power. The death of Rugila around 434 CE created a succession crisis that would ultimately bring the most famous Hun leader to power. The confederation was briefly ruled by joint leaders, but political maneuvering soon concentrated authority in the hands of a single individual, whose name would become synonymous with barbarian terror: Attila. Attila's rise to supreme power among the Huns was not merely the result of inheritance or political accident. He possessed the military genius, diplomatic skill, and ruthless determination necessary to transform a regional confederation into a force capable of challenging the greatest powers of his time. By uniting all the Hunnish tribes from the northern Caucasus to the upper Danube River and rendering the Romans a tributary state, Attila fashioned the most powerful empire of the West in the 5th century. Attila's early campaigns focused on consolidating Hun control over territories that had previously maintained some degree of independence. He systematically eliminated rival leaders within the confederation while expanding Hun influence into new regions. His military reforms created a more centralized command structure that could coordinate the movements of multiple armies across vast distances. These organizational improvements transformed the Hun Confederation from a loose alliance of tribal groups into a unified empire capable of strategic planning and sustained military campaigns. The Hun military under Attila reached the peak of its effectiveness through innovations that combined traditional nomadic tactics with new techniques learned from conquered peoples. Hun armies included not only horse archers but also heavy cavalry, infantry formations, and sophisticated siege equipment. This military diversity allowed Attila to adapt his tactics to different opponents and terrain conditions, making Hun forces effective in both open battle and siege warfare. Attila's diplomatic strategy was as sophisticated as his military organization. He maintained intelligence networks throughout the Roman Empire, using bribery and political manipulation to influence imperial policy. He exploited religious and political divisions within Roman society, supporting different factions when it served Hun interests. This diplomatic warfare proved as destructive to Roman power as his military campaigns, undermining imperial authority from within while applying external pressure through military threats. The Hun economy under Attila was based primarily on tribute, plunder, and the control of trade routes. The Confederation extracted regular payments from both the Eastern and Western Roman empires, using the threat of military action to ensure compliance. Hun control over the Danube River and the mountain passes leading into Italy gave them leverage over crucial commercial networks, allowing them to profit from peaceful trade while maintaining the option of military intervention. Attila's court became a center of international diplomacy as Roman, Persian, and Germanic envoys sought to influence Hun policy. These diplomatic missions provided valuable intelligence about the political situations in neighboring territories while demonstrating Hun power to potential enemies and allies. The elaborate ceremonies surrounding these diplomatic exchanges served both practical and symbolic purposes, reinforcing Attila's status as a legitimate ruler while gathering information about foreign capabilities and intentions. The Hun legal system under Attila blended traditional nomadic customs with practices borrowed from sedentary civilizations. Justice was administered through a combination of tribal law and royal decree, with Attila serving as the supreme judge for important cases. This legal framework provided stability within the Confederation while maintaining the flexibility necessary for governing diverse populations with different cultural backgrounds. Attila's invasion of Gaul in 451 CE represented the culmination of his Western ambitions. The massive Hun army that crossed the Rhine included not only ethnic Huns but also Ostrogoths, Gepids, and other Germanic allies. The campaign's objective was not merely plunder but the establishment of permanent Hun control over the wealthy territories of Gaul, which would have given Attila access to the Atlantic coast and positioned him to threaten Britain and Spain. The Hun advance through Gaul created panic throughout the Western Roman Empire. Cities that had considered themselves safe behind Roman fortifications suddenly found themselves threatened by an army more powerful than any that had appeared in Western Europe since the Germanic invasions of the previous century. The systematic destruction of Metz, Reims, and other major urban centers demonstrated Hun capabilities while serving as warnings to communities that might consider resistance. The Romans had learned from previous encounters with Hun forces and allied with the Visigoths and other barbarian tribes to finally stop the Huns. This coalition represented a remarkable diplomatic achievement, as it united traditional enemies in a common cause. The Visigothic king Theodoric I, whose people had originally fled westward to escape Hun pressure, now joined with his former Roman oppressors to prevent Hun domination of Gaul. The Battle of the Catalonian Plains, fought near modern-day Troyes in June 451 C, was one of the most significant engagements in European history. The coalition army assembled by the Roman general Aetius included not only Roman legionaries but also Visigoths, Alans, Burgundians, and various other tribal contingents. Against this diverse force, Attila deployed a similarly mixed army that represented the full military power of his confederation. According to legend, the night before the battle, Attila consulted his soothsayers and received omens suggesting that while the Huns would not be defeated, their enemy commander would die in the battle. This prophecy proved partially accurate, as the Visigothic king Theodoric I was killed during the engagement, though the battle's outcome was far from the decisive Hun victory that Attila had expected. The battle itself was characterized by the fierce fighting typical of encounters between professional armies. The Hun horse archers inflicted heavy casualties on the coalition forces, but the combined weight of Roman infantry and Gothic cavalry prevented a complete Hun breakthrough. As darkness fell, both armies held portions of the battlefield, with either side able to claim complete victory. Attila's decision to withdraw from Gaul following the Battle of the Catalonian Plains reflected his realistic assessment of the strategic situation. While his army remained intact and capable of continued fighting, the failure to achieve decisive victory had demonstrated the limitations of Hun power when confronted by a united opposition. The withdrawal preserved Hun military strength while avoiding the risks associated with extended operations in hostile territory. The Hun retreat from Gaul did not end Attila's ambitions for western expansion. Instead, he redirected his efforts toward Italy, launching a campaign in 452 C that would bring Hun forces closer to Rome than they had ever come. The Italian expedition represented Attila's last attempt to achieve the complete domination of Western Europe that had eluded him in Gaul. The Hun invasion of Italy proceeded with the systematic efficiency that characterized Attila's military operations. The fortress city of Aquileia, which guarded the approaches to the Italian peninsula, fell after a prolonged siege that demonstrated Hun mastery of advanced siege techniques. The destruction of Aquileia was so complete that the city never fully recovered, serving as a permanent reminder of Hun capabilities. As Hun forces advanced through northern Italy, they encountered minimal resistance from Roman armies that had been weakened by decades of internal conflict and resource depletion. The cities of Milan, Pavia, and other major centers either surrendered without a fight or fell quickly to Hun siege operations. The systematic nature of the Hun advance created panic throughout Italy, as refugees fled southward with reports of unprecedented destruction. The meeting between Attila and Pope Leo I in 452 C became one of the most famous diplomatic encounters in European history. The precise details of their conversation remain unknown, but the meeting resulted in Attila's decision to withdraw from Italy without advancing on Rome. Various explanations have been proposed for this decision, including papal persuasion, concerns about plague in his army, and strategic calculations about the risks of extended operations far from Hun territory. Attila's death in 453 C marked the beginning of the Hun Confederation's rapid collapse. The great leader died on his wedding night, apparently from a hemorrhage, leaving behind a succession crisis that his political and military system could not survive. Without Attila's personal authority to maintain unity among the diverse tribal groups that comprised the Confederation, the empire quickly fragmented into competing factions. The Battle of Nideo in 454 C witnessed the destruction of Hun military power by a coalition of Germanic tribes that had previously served as Hun allies. The Gepids, Ostrogoths, and other groups that had been incorporated into Attila's empire now turned against their former masters, seeking to recover their independence and establish their own territorial kingdoms. The defeat was catastrophic for the Huns, eliminating their military superiority and scattering their remaining forces. Following the disaster at Nideo, the surviving Huns found themselves in a position similar to that of the Gothic refugees who had fled Hun expansion a century earlier. Small groups of Hun warriors sought service as mercenaries with various Roman commanders, while others attempted to establish independent strongholds in remote regions. The Great Confederation that had dominated European politics for over half a century simply disintegrated, leaving only scattered remnants. Some Hun groups attempted to maintain their traditional lifestyle in the regions north of the Black Sea, but they lacked the political organization and military strength necessary to recreate their former power. Others migrated further west, eventually disappearing into the general population of medieval Europe. Archaeological evidence suggests that Hun cultural influences persisted in certain regions, particularly in terms of metalworking techniques and decorative styles, but the Huns as a distinct political entity had effectively ceased to exist. The impact of the Hun period on European development extended far beyond their brief moment of political dominance. The Huns had, for a very short time, a very big impact on European history, fundamentally altering the demographic and political landscape of the continent. Their pressure on Germanic tribes had initiated the massive population movements that ultimately led to the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the emergence of medieval European kingdoms. The military innovations introduced by the Huns influenced European warfare for centuries. Their emphasis on cavalry mobility and archery capabilities inspired similar developments among the peoples they encountered. The strategic use of mounted archers became a standard feature of medieval military organization, while the political structures developed to coordinate nomadic confederations provided models for later empire builders. Recent genetic studies have provided new insights into Hun origins and composition, suggesting connections to ancient Mongolian populations while also revealing the diverse ethnic makeup of Attila's forces. These investigations show that Attila's Huns were a motley crew of Central European locals and East Asian immigrants, confirming the multicultural character of the Hun Confederation that historical sources had suggested. The Hun legacy in European memory proved more durable than their political existence. Medieval chroniclers preserved accounts of Attila's campaigns, often embellishing them with legendary elements that reflected the terror his name continued to inspire. The image of the Huns as savage destroyers of civilization became embedded in European culture, influencing later perceptions of nomadic peoples and contributing to stereotypes that persisted for centuries. The economic consequences of the Hun period were profound and long-lasting. The disruption of trade routes, the destruction of urban centers, and the massive population movements initiated by Hun expansion fundamentally altered European commercial networks. The decline of Roman taxation systems, partly caused by territorial losses to Hun pressure, accelerated the empire's financial collapse and contributed to the transition from ancient to medieval economic structures. The religious implications of the Hun period were equally significant. The cooperation between Pope Leo I and various barbarian leaders in opposing Hun expansion demonstrated the Church's growing political role, while the survival of Christian communities in Hun-controlled territories showed the religion's adaptability to changing political conditions. The eventual conversion of former Hun allies to Christianity contributed to the spread of the faith throughout Central and Eastern Europe. Archaeological excavations in former Hun territories have revealed the material culture of this remarkable confederation. Hun burial sites contain artifacts from across Eurasia, demonstrating the extensive trade networks that connected their empire to distant regions. The craftsmanship evident in Hun metalwork and jewelry shows a sophisticated artistic tradition that blended influences from multiple cultures. The study of Hun society has provided valuable insights into the organization of nomadic confederations and their interactions with sedentary civilizations. The Hun example demonstrates how mobile societies could achieve temporary political dominance over much larger and more economically developed populations through superior military organization and strategic leadership. This pattern would be repeated by later nomadic empires, including the Mongols and Turks. The linguistic legacy of the Huns remains largely mysterious, as their language was never systematically recorded and appears to have left few traces in later European languages. However, some scholars have identified possible Hun loanwords in Germanic and Slavic languages, particularly terms related to military equipment and political organization. These linguistic fragments provide tantalizing clues about Hun culture and its interactions with neighboring peoples. The geographic impact of the Hun period can still be traced in modern European place names and archaeological sites. Regions that served as major Hun settlements or battlefields often preserve memories of this period in local traditions and toponymy. The Hungarian plain, which served as the core of Attila's empire, remains one of Europe's most important agricultural and strategic regions. The diplomatic innovations developed during the Hun period influenced European international relations for centuries. The treaty systems that governed Hun-Roman relations established precedents for dealing with powerful barbarian confederations, while the intelligence networks maintained by Hun leaders provided models for later diplomatic organizations. The integration of military threats with political negotiation became a standard feature of medieval statecraft. As night falls over the Hungarian plain where Attila once held court, the wind still carries echoes of the great migration that brought the Huns from the distant steppes of Asia to the heart of Europe. Their empire lasted barely a century, but its impact reshaped a continent. The descendants of Roman citizens who had cowered behind city walls during Hun raids would build the medieval kingdoms that defined European civilization. The Germanic tribes scattered by Hun pressure would establish the Holy Roman Empire, the kingdoms of France and England, and the principalities of Eastern Europe. The Huns themselves vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared, leaving behind only graves, legends, and the profound changes they had wrought in European society. Their story serves as a reminder of history's fundamental unpredictability, showing how a relatively small group of nomadic warriors could alter the destiny of entire civilizations. In the quiet darkness of the steppe, where archaeological sites mark the locations of Hun settlements, the past whispers its eternal lesson, that power, no matter how great, is always temporary, but the consequences of its exercise endure forever. The wind grows still as the last echoes of Hun war cries fade into the silence of centuries. The great migration has ended, the empire has fallen, and the nomad warriors have returned to dust. But their legacy lives on in the very structure of European civilization, in the kingdoms and cultures that emerged from the chaos they created. In this peaceful darkness, let the story of the Huns carry you gently into sleep, knowing that even the mightiest storms eventually pass, leaving the world forever changed in their wake.